Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.
Welcome to Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth Courtney, president of LPB. Joining me to moderate tonight's discussion on sexual harassment in Louisiana is Robin Merrick, Vice President of External Affairs for Southern University. Welcome, Robin.
Beth, thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be joining us this evening. So, 2017 came to a close with an avalanche of allegations against high-profile figures for sexual misconduct. Harvey Weinstein in Hollywood, Al Franken in Congress, and former senatorial candidate Roy Moore in Alabama are just a few of the men who made headlines. And things don't appear to be subsiding in 2018. Each week, it seems, new charges against a politician or celebrity are being revealed.
Well, unfortunately, Louisiana has not been immune to the issue. A celebrity chef, as well as appointed and elected officials, have found themselves facing accusations of sexual impropriety. So how serious is the problem in our state? What is the best way to address it? And where do you draw the line between improper or harassing behavior? We'll explore those issues and more with our audience and panel. But first, an overview. Shaken recently by multiple allegations of sexual misconduct, both houses of Congress are reviewing their sexual harassment policies. Here in Louisiana, lawmakers are also working to form a common approach for dealing with the issue at the state level.
People want there to be a uniform sexual harassment policy across state government because there hasn't been one. Even the House and Senate, how they deal with sexual harassment is different from each other.
Elizabeth Crisp is the Capitol reporter for The Advocate. She says that policy reviews are taking place in the Legislative Auditor's Office and by the Senate Committee on Women and Children and the legislature's Women's Caucus. In December, Governor John Bel Edwards created a 7-member task force on sexual harassment and discrimination policy.
I think that we're going to see and hear more about this. I think that it is important to know that this is just kind of this beginning of all of this, and largely due to it has become an issue of such national prominence lately.
It's also been an expensive issue for the state, as The Advocate discovered through a recent records request.
We sought information into how much the state has paid out in settlements when somebody has claimed that they have been the victim of sexual harassment. And it actually showed that there's been nearly $4 million since 2004. And it's been spread all across state government, in universities, the Department of Health, the Department of Corrections, in prisons. There have been issues. It really has kind of touched all across state government.
In the private sector, one of the highest reported payouts in Louisiana was $500,000 to a male employee of Shaw Coastal. His reports of sexual harassment by a male supervisor went unheeded for 5 months. He then resigned and filed suit. Among the court's findings was that Shaw Coastal did not take prompt remedial action.
Addressing harassment starts and stops with HR.
Cortland Cheney is a human resources management consultant and a member of the governor's sexual harassment task force. He says while businesses may have procedures in place, they often drop the ball when a charge is made.
Failing to investigate, inconsistency in the investigation process. So often when someone is accused of a behavior, the person to whom the accusation is shared may also have their own kind of preconceived notions as to whether or not the behavior that's being cited is a problem. They may have biases in favor of either the accused or the person filing the complaint.
Cheney says the Human Resources Department should communicate the company's sexual harassment policy to employees and address complaints promptly with impartiality.
One of the things that I have noticed is a lot of times companies wait until a complaint has been filed to raise the issue. I believe these types of issues should be raised when there are no complaints. Very much like an inoculation would prevent you from getting a disease, I think let's raise these issues proactively before there ever is a problem.
How well do employees and employers understand what constitutes sexual harassment? Vicki Crochet, an attorney who deals with labor law, summarizes the legal definition.
Unwanted or unwelcome requests for sexual favors, sexual advances, or other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature, when that conduct is submission to that conduct or rejection of that conduct is used as the basis for an employment decision, or when that kind of conduct creates what we call a hostile work environment.
Crochet admits ambiguity still exists.
How much behavior is enough under the law to amount to sexual harassment? Is the behavior unwelcome? Those are the two areas where I think there is the most gray.
Another obstacle, Crochet says, is that most people don't say whether a certain conduct is unwanted.
Maybe they'll blush, or they'll walk away, or they'll not respond to a comment that usually would get a response. And we all have to be responsible for our behavior in the workplace. But it's not always easy to know whether what you're doing is unwelcome.
A national survey by Career Builder found that 72% of workers who experienced sexual harassment did not report it.
They're fearful of what might happen to them on their job. It's uncomfortable, it's embarrassing. It's sometimes a situation where the conduct wasn't so bad and it was something that the person was willing to tolerate or even go along with, and then a line gets crossed.
Often men don't realize where that line is. A national study conducted by the Barma Group found that when presented with a list of 20 actions ranging from groping to lighthearted flirting, men in all cases but one were less likely than women to rate them as sexual harassment. To employees in the public and private arena, Crochet offers a simple rule of thumb.
If you are doing something at work that you would not like to see reported on the front page, or if you wouldn't want your mama to know you're doing it, then don't do it at work.
Joining us to explore sexual harassment is our studio audience. It includes a sociologist, advocates against sexual assault, college students, community members that share a common interest in this topic. We also have two students from the Legislative Youth Advisory Council from Bossier City and Baton Rouge. Thanks everyone for being here with us today. So LPB, want you all to know that LPB posted an online survey about sexual harassment on the Public Square website last week. Of the 134 people who had completed it at the time of tonight's taping, 63% were female and 37% were male. When presented with a list of 16 actions to identify as a form of sexual harassment, men were less likely than women to consider them harassing in all but 4 instances. The most significant differences were showing sexy images to someone, which only 78% of men considered sexual harassment, while 90% of women did. Only 83% of men considered unwanted hand-holding as objectionable compared to 93% of women. And while just 79% of men said attempting to kiss someone was harassment, 87% of women said it was as well. So on the flip side, fewer women than men considered 4 actions as sexual harassment. Making a sexual joke was labeled harassment by 75% of men, but just 64% of women. Lighthearted flirting was considered harassing by 34% of men, but only 24% of women. Winking was identified by 41% of men, but just 33% of women. And while 60% of men said whistling was harassment, only 57% of women did. So using the list of actions as their reference, 82% of women said they had been sexually harassed. 28% know of someone who was harassed or witnessed sexual harassment themselves. So of those harassed, 39% did not tell anyone. Their top reason for not reporting was because they felt embarrassed or ashamed. That was 68%, followed by they didn't think anything would be done. That was 62%, or they feared retaliation. That was 50%. So let's start there. Is awareness of sexual harassment enough? What more can be done to combat the problem? So now we're going to turn it over to our studio audience to share with us their thoughts about the topic of sexual harassment. And we've got a great audience, like I said, so we're just going to start randomly. Joy, if you would tell us who you are and who you represent and what your thoughts are on this subject.
I'm Joy Blanchard, and I live here in Baton Rouge, and this is a subject I'm very passionate about. The Me Too movement brought something like this to the fore of everyone's attention. Unfortunately, I'm not completely convinced that it's the magic pill that everyone's been thinking it might be. I know people who have witnessed, who have experienced sexual harassment, who have not come forward to report. High-profile CEOs have lost their positions, politicians have lost their positions, but I just really am not convinced that this will be something that solves the problem for the everyday woman and man who experiences discrimination that's been occurring in our society for hundreds of years, that laws have not stopped, even though they were intended to. So I think it'll take a much deeper cultural change.
So much deeper cultural change. We'll hear from someone on this side. We'll start with Diana. Tell us who you are, who you represent.
I'm Diana Payton with YWCA Greater Baton Rouge. And my thoughts on all of this as different allegations are coming forward is making sure that we're helping to vet as soon as possible those allegations. And making sure that our human resources departments in different organizations and companies understand how to quickly respond to this, but also go through due process. You have to vet each allegation as well.
Yes, fully vetting the allegations. I want to hear from one of our younger representatives, Brittany.
My name is Brittany Hunt, and I'm an advocate with the Louisiana Foundation Against Sexual Assault. So we're an organization that works with victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment, and we really just see the prevalence of this problem. I know you mentioned some statistics that may seem shockingly high, but to advocates in the field, that sounds about right. I know I've experienced sexual harassment at every job I've had in my 28 years up until this one. So it's something that unfortunately is so prevalent, and yet people still aren't taking it seriously.
So we have an issue of taking things seriously. I'm going to top it off on this side. Ravathi.
Hi, I'm Ravati Hines from the Louisiana Women's Policy and Research Commission. So happy to be here. I too echo what Joy was saying in regards to culture. Laws, policies, and procedures have existed for a very long time. Every business, every corporation, every university, every state agency has a sexual harassment policy in the books. But the problem is the cultural change that comes with incidents of sexual harassment actually being reported, and that is going to take more than policies and procedures to make it happen. Hopefully the environment that we are in now, wherein that reporting of incidents is encouraged, will bring about a cultural change in our society for victims of sexual harassment to come out and speak about it and not shied away.
Yeah, so cultural issues keep popping up in our conversation. Raphael, you're one of two gentlemen on our panel this afternoon, so just tell us your thoughts as a male hearing all of this.
Sure. Well, I'm Raphael, and I'm the Executive Director at the Louisiana Foundation Against Sexual Assault. And I keep hearing the word cultural change, being spoken so much, and I mean, that's truly the way I feel. I think that it's such a big issue, and if we don't change the culture, I mean, we live in a society where females are making 68% of what males do in the workplace. Whether it's gender, pay inequity, it all leads to this culture where I don't think we're doing, the gentleman on TV said it, we're not doing enough to prevent it from happening. Everything that we're doing has to do with a reaction once it happens. We need to build that culture at work where anyone is comfortable and feels safe and thinks or knows that they're going to be believed when they go ahead and make that complaint. Because if you don't give them a safe place to make that complaint, then it's never going to happen. So it truly is a cultural change all the way around.
Okay, thank you, Raphael. the odds that we have two Ravathis tonight. So we have our younger Ravathi, our high school Ravathi. Please tell us who you are.
So I'm Revathi Menon. I'm a senior at Baton Rouge High School. I represent Louisiana Youth Advisory Council. I think this issue is, it's very important to me because as a woman who does want to pursue higher education, I do want to go to graduate school. I know there are less women the higher up you go, and more rates of, sexual harassment. So it worries me because I want to be able to thrive in a safe environment where I feel I can come forward. And it is a huge cultural change because, we have to know what constitutes sexual harassment, what is consent.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Bobby. You're a high school student as well. You're from North Louisiana. Tell us about yourself and how you think about this subject.
Yes, ma'am. I'm Bobby Alexander from Bossier City, Louisiana, and I'm also on the Legislative Youth Advisory Council. And I feel that the sexual harassment issue is a bigger issue. I think because with all the stuff going on in the news and people acting differently, I think it's a test of our character. Because if someone's character is where they're going to degrade a woman or they're going to do violent actions against other people, they're not a great person. And so I think the bigger issue is not just one action. I think the issue is the overall person and the character of how they are and who they are.
Okay, so it goes beyond the action in your thoughts. So we're going to come back up top here. Christy.
Yes, I'm Christy Perry. I'm from Southern University. I'm a sociology professor, and I'm also director of the Center for Social Research, where we have the Stop the Violence Against Women program, Stop the Violence Against College Students. And I agree wholeheartedly with what everyone is saying, particularly when we talk about cultural changes. And I think about our youth and how we have to set the norms as it relates to sexual harassment. And by setting the norms, teaching other students, talking to people about when they've been sexually harassed, having the conversation. And I think that's a great start as it relates to how we address sexual harassment.
Really having the conversation. So we have Southern University represented. We have a student from LSU as well, Sarah.
Hi. I'm a journalist at La Politics and for the Manchester School State Bureau at LSU. So I actually work a few doors down from Elizabeth Crisp, who was on the video. And at the Capitol, there's been a lot of, that's kind of been one of the biggest things that the media all over the country has been focusing on, but also at the Louisiana State Capitol ever since the governor's deputy chief of programs and planning resigned for allegations. What we've been talking about a lot, reporters and lobbyists and lawmakers and anyone who really comes to the Capitol, has been just the idiosyncratic issues that Louisiana has, especially just with the culture. We're a very touchy sort of people. If you're in a different state, that can be taken the wrong way. So that's been a topic of conversation that we've had to grapple with, and it's also just from a policy perspective. This is a very unique problem because it's not something that you can, or it's harder to regulate than the other issues that lawmakers are grappling with, such as guns or opioids, because it's not. It's something that happens in the shadows. It's very insidious, and it's not already a marketable product or something that we can regulate very easily.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. So that's all the time we have for this portion of our show. When we return, we'll be joined by a panel of experts as we explore sexual harassment in Louisiana. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. Tonight we're discussing sexual harassment in Louisiana. Joining us now is our panel of experts, Senator Sharon Hewitt, a Republican from Slidell. Among the committees that she serves on are the Select Committee for Women and Children. Senator Hewitt has asked the Louisiana Legislative Auditor to look into hiring policies and procedures to discourage sexual harassment. Janice Lansing is the Chief Financial Officer for the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. She has served in several state agencies beginning in 1992, and in December, she was appointed the chairperson of Governor Edwards' task force on sexual harassment and discrimination policy. Next is Craig Broom. He is the president of High Flyer Human Resources, a consulting firm for businesses offering personalized training for employers on human resources, payroll, and benefit administration. Mr. Broom is also a member of the Louisiana Society for Human Resource Management. And lastly, we have attorney Allison Jones. She's an attorney with Downer, Jones, Marino, and Wilhite, located in Shreveport. Ms. Jones has settled, mediated, and litigated hundreds of employment law cases. Several of her cases have been featured on 60 Minutes, CNN, and other national news networks. Before we go to our audience questions, I'd first like to ask each of you, from your perspective, very briefly, what have you been hearing about this topic in the news and throughout? I know we'll start with Senator Hewitt.
Well, of course, women all around the nation are talking about this topic, and this is not just a national topic. This topic involves the state of Louisiana as well. And I think that, we all know that we want to establish an environment where all people feel safe and free of sexual harassment in their workplace. And we want to do that in the state of Louisiana. Women all deserve, and all people deserve, that kind of environment, whether you're working in state government or you're working in private industry. And so as a legislator and someone who has worked in a very male-dominated industry as an executive in the oil and gas industry, and now a state senator also in a very male-dominated industry, I see that as partially my responsibility to advocate for changes in the culture in that area, and to bring legislation that will help move us further down the road to where we need to be.
Okay. Janice Lansing.
Well, I echo the same things that Senator Hewitt said, and I would like to also offer, just as a manager and dealing with employees in my profession, we're all talking about it in terms of policy development, and chairman of the governor's task force. We're talking about that. We will be recommending statewide policy recommendations for sexual harassment. It's an important topic, and one that in my own agency we discuss at least once a year, if not more often, in terms of training and culture and expectations of employees and our managers. I echo the workplace should be free of any form of sexual harassment, discrimination or otherwise. It needs to be an environment that employees feel very safe to come to work in. So we're hearing about it in the news, yes, but it's something as a manager that's always on the top of my mind.
Thank you. Craig Broom, as a human resources consultant and expert, you heard the video earlier that is something that starts and ends really in human resources. So your thoughts and what you've been hearing.
That's correct. We see a lot of individuals, CEOs, leaders now turning to their human resources departments asking, how can we help, how can we change the culture? And we also hear now a lot of water cooler conversations. Obviously employees now have a stronger voice than ever to bring these topics to the leaders and saying, what are we going to do in our own organization and our employment base to stop these behaviors? From our perspective, we also look at maybe now it's time to address what we see as the real problem, and that real problem is the gender inequalities in our workforce. The real problem is that maybe also the objectification and dehumanization of individuals in our workforce. And so I think it's now time that we start not just focusing so much on a PowerPoint on sexual harassment, that we peel back the layers and get to the real problem.
Okay, getting to the real problem. So as an attorney, your thoughts, because you get a chance to see this from both sides, Allison.
Well, I think we've seen since the Me Too movement and everything that's happened, I've seen an explosion of these claims coming to my office in consultation format. But I think Craig really hit on the major point. Sexual harassment is really just a symptom of a broader problem, and that broader problem is gender inequality. And so I think if we look at addressing the culture issues that you all raised when you commented on this issue, empowering women, making sure that pay equity is a priority, passing laws that allow women to become equal in the workforce, we'll see the issue of sexual harassment recede, because you won't have the power differential that you have today, where women in particular are experiencing this type of conduct. And honestly, these stories have been revealing only to men. Women have always known how bad this was. They just feel empowered at this moment to really bring these issues to the forefront. But I think it really until we address the broader issue of gender inequality and the cultural change that really all of you have pointed out, I don't think we'll ever really solve this issue, even though we have good intentions with policies, we have good intentions with law, and we should proceed down that path. What we really need to do is proceed towards legislation that empowers women and allows them to be equal in the workforce.
Very good points made and things that you're seeing in the news. Now we're going to open up the floor to our participants for their questions. And again, we want to thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm going to start with Jazz on the top back here to tell us your question. You had a question about the Me Too movement.
Yes, I guess you all actually answered a lot of what I was wondering about the Me Too movement and how it's impacted Louisiana in particular. But what I was just thinking about was how we're reaching people who are of different socioeconomic statuses. So I see that, quite often those people who are pressing charges or raising this often are people who make, a higher salary. So how are we empowering those who, don't make as much, that person who's making minimum wage and experiencing sexual harassment regularly and is scared to come forward because they need that job? How are we empowering those type of people?
I want to ask Senator Hewitt to respond to that question in terms of how we're empowering from the standpoint of legislative and legislative issues and policy.
Well, clearly, people have to feel comfortable in reporting, and you have to know that when you do report, that some action is going to be taken. And so, yes, we can establish policies that would maybe give you a third party that you can report to, that's someone other maybe than your immediate supervisor. We know that fear of retaliation is one of those things that people, do worry about. But it is about changing the culture, and that does come from leadership. Leaders have to kind of walk the walk and talk the talk. And you have to be very committed to it. And it's not just policies on a sheet of paper where people will really genuinely understand that they can report and that action will be taken. And then those other employees will recognize that this is a workplace that is safe, and that those that are in charge do take it seriously, and that they don't condone that kind of behavior in the workplace.
I'd also pose that question to Attorney Jones, if you would share with us your thoughts on that.
Well, one of the problems with sexual harassment these days, and particularly as it relates to your question, is that the law doesn't provide a great remedy. You can file with the EEOC, but you have to do so within a certain time period. And a lot of times these stories that we're hearing in the Me Too movement are stories that we're hearing a year after it's happened or 2 years after it's happened. There's not a legal remedy. So then you have to make it a business remedy at that point. You really have to shame the business to where they feel as if they have to take action. And let's not forget, when we talk about the issue of gender inequity, that as it relates to people of different races and as it relates to people of different protected classes, when you have the intersection of gender discrimination and the other forms of discrimination, it's amplified. And so it's really hard for people who deal with that intersection of discrimination to come forward, because a lot of times they're in situations where A, they don't have the financial resources to do it, B, they're scared to do it because they're not empowered and they fear reprisal, and C, they don't know how to do it because they don't have the information. And so one of the things that this particular forum can do is tell them, hey, if you're a victim of sexual harassment or any form of discrimination, contact the EEOC ASAP, because you have time limits and they can tell you what your time limits are. And then if you can, of course, go see a private attorney to help you pursue your claim.
So Craig, I'd like you to respond as well, particularly from the standpoint of the consensual versus non-consensual, and as you consult with your clients. What's the policy sort of around that when things they start consensual and perhaps they move into a different realm?
Well, obviously, organizations, are always going to want to have established policies that are dealing with, when we're talking about consensual and unwanted. I think that the key is it unwanted? Right. And so you can have two individuals that are in a relationship and something happens that's not wanted. And I think you have to be able then to, as an individual, to respect that other individual, to recognize that now we're moving into an area that is going to be qualified as a sexual harassment claim, which is the unwanted advances. And so when you have consensual situations, a lot of organizations have something, sometimes we call them love pacts, which were basically where you would take the two individuals and have them agree to a document in writing that you are having a consensual relationship. And should this become an consensual relationship, you know you need to let us know as the Human Resources Department. And so following those policies, now not every organization obviously has that. And now individuals are saying, wait, that's my private life. So would cause some secondary issues.
All right, that definitely raises a whole nother level of conversation when you talk about the love packs. We're going to take another question from the audience, and Jesse, I know you earlier had a question regarding the economic justices involved in sexual harassment.
Yes, my name is Jessie Niablis, and I'm with the Louisiana Foundation Against Sexual Assault. And luckily, Jazz and I are on the same page with that question. So I'm going to ask a different one. My primary role is in primary prevention, so stopping sexual violence before it happens, not just the response. And so I'm hearing so much about cultural change and needing to get beyond trainings and move past that. And so I'm wondering about the specific policies or specific legislative priorities you have to address those root causes of economic injustice, minimum wage issues, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia, and other issues that put people significantly more at risk for sexual harassment.
Senator Hewitt?
She said the legislative word.
Yes,
so
she did. that was our tip-off.
No, that's a great question. Certainly I think the legislative priorities will focus on policies, training. There needs to be additional training for supervisors to understand how to handle that. One of the things that I'm working on that I'm actually very proud of, and we talk about pay inequity, my answer to that is STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and that's creating jobs in high-wage industries for all of our people. And so, I'm very focused on working in that area so that we have better opportunities for women in particular. I'm a mechanical engineer by background, so having more women in technical professional fields is very important to me. And so we're working very hard to create more of those jobs, so Louisiana is a go-to state for those kinds of industries, so that we can provide more jobs for women in particular. And so I think that's going to help when you talk about some of the inequities.
Okay, I want to ask you now, Janice, just from the standpoint of recommendations from the task force, that I understand you all will be coming out with your report very soon. And so if you have anything that you may be able to respond to Jesse's question in that regard.
So the task force has a fairly narrow assignment, and that is to look at policies across the state for sexual harassment and discrimination. So we bifurcated those in terms of policy formation, and we've looked at sexual harassment. We've looked at it in depth, a very thorough analysis. We actually have a policy that we're going to recommend to be adopted statewide for the governor, and we're hoping to have that piece out in a couple of days. The discrimination piece will be coming out after that. So the policy is a policy, right? It outlines the expectations of behavior for all employees. It provides the reporting mechanism. It provides the procedures. And I would encourage all employees in wherever you work, know what your policy is, know what those provisions afford you, and then hold management accountable for that, right? So to answer your question, and someone touched on this earlier, the tone from the top is the key. So the employee can know what the policy says, the manager can know what the policy says, but if that is not conveyed routinely and often and top of mind awareness, I think you lose part of the ability to prevent. And for me, I think in the task force we're talking about how do you prevent. So you have a policy, right, that you need to have if a complaint's filed, and folks know how to do that. But how do you avoid even getting there? And that has to do with the tone from the top, the leadership. And so part of our recommendation is actually going to be additional supervisory type training for those in leadership positions, particularly department heads, and I guess in the private sector that would be your CEO, but our purview is only state government. But the point being, if it doesn't come from the top, employees really don't have the assurance that when their complaint is made, that it's going to be taken seriously and responded to appropriately. And that's important that employees have that assurance. And I think through these policies, you will see that, and we're going to encourage the additional training to be adopted, mandated in legislation.
So Janice, I want to follow up on that a little bit from the standpoint of what's being done in terms of the responsibility of the employee. We talked a good bit about the employer's responsibility in terms of creating the policy, setting the tone from the top. But say we have a new employee coming into the workforce, not very familiar with how things work, maybe not even really familiar with the culture, but how do we train them to understand what they do and what's appropriate professional behavior as it relates to this arena? And I'll ask you that, Janice, and we'll also go to Craig. To get
Sure. Most state agencies, and I would imagine most organizations, have some type of orientation. I know my agency does, and I'm fairly certain all state agencies do. In that orientation period, the employee is given a series of documents, manuals, trainings that are required, and that includes sexual harassment, discrimination, driver training, a whole breadth of training that employee has to go through. Given that the employee it's conveyed the expectations of conduct in the organization. But having it in orientation can't be the only time they get it. So we are looking at annual, and in some cases more often than that, and certainly for supervisors at the additional training. So the expectation has to be conveyed not once, not twice, but often, and as often as possible.
And Craig?
Yeah, absolutely. Echo what Janice was saying. You know, from the leadership, especially the leader has to establish a culture of zero tolerance on these topics. But when we bring in new employees into the organizations, we also have to make sure that we are training them on all aspects of the policies, on all aspects of our culture. And if we also train them on cultural adaptation, and so areas where they may not used to be dealing with a certain policy, but if we can hone in those skills and train them on how to adapt to your existing business's culture, then we'll start making some real change. And yes, we will have to do it again and again and again until we get it right.
So Deja is one of our college students here joining us tonight, and she represents the Association of Women Students. So Deja, what is your question in regard? You had a question about how we're training our children, and even as a college student.
Hello, good evening. My name is Deja Lodry. I'm a senior at Southern University in Agricultural and Mechanical College, as well as a president of the Association for Women Students. 3 words that have truly stuck out to me tonight are culture, leadership, and prevention. So it definitely made me think of our children in Louisiana today. I believe that we are desensitized at a young age with sexuality in our state. We glamorize sexuality here in Louisiana. So a lot of times our children are desensitized to what is going on around them. They're not fully informed on what is okay and what's not okay. What steps are we taking, or should we be taking, to help fully inform our children, because they're the future leaders of tomorrow. Just as we were children and our leaders today, they'll be leading our tomorrow. So I want to know, what steps are we taking for children and young adults like myself to be fully informed before they reach the workplace?
So I'm going to ask.
Great question.
And you read my mind, Allison. I was about to say, this is your question. If you would respond.
And I'm going to have to take my lawyer's hat off and put on my mom's hat for a second.
Yeah.
One of the things you can tell your child, as first of all, you lead by example, and then one of the things that I think is really a problem as it relates to sexual harassment is sort of a culture of collusion, of just being complicit in this conduct. If you teach your child how to speak out about these issues, I tell people all the time in the workplace, if you see it, call it out. If your friend's telling a rape joke or they're using offensive language, call them out. Tell them that's not acceptable to you. And if you teach your child how to be empowered that way, then they'll understand by the time they get to the workplace what conduct is appropriate. You do that by example, but you do it by really tough, hard dialogue. And these are hard conversations to have with your children. And as a lawyer who's done this for 33 years, who has raised 2 boys, you can imagine the type of conversations we've had. But that's something that I think it's from the parent. Now, you ask the question, as a society, what can schools do? You know, I'm at a loss there. I really don't know, and I might defer to maybe the legislator or you know, what the state can do on that level. But from a parental point of view, I think you teach them to call it out and not to be complicit in that type of conduct.
So, Senator Hewitt, your fellow panelists ask you to respond to that.
I'm sorry, there's that legislator word again.
Yes.
You know, that's a tough one. You know, we always talk about how much teaching we should do on these kinds of very sensitive topics in K through 12 educational settings. And so I think that that's an area that we have really not gotten into very much yet, to be honest. And I do believe it is role modeled, I hope appropriately, in the school system, where again students see teachers treating each other respectfully, male and female teachers, and don't observe inappropriate behavior, you know, in the school system. But I don't think that we've taken the steps yet to actually do any teaching in that area. And that'd be a very difficult conversation.
Yeah, it would.
Definitely. Janice, I think I see you wanting to respond as well.
I would like to say something to that, because as a person who hires people in the workforce, and we hire young people all the time, it is a challenge for us, because we're getting folks that have a different mindset than I'm used to seeing, and so we're having to change how we coach our employees in the workplace. They don't always come with the same, I guess, training that we're expecting, and so part of the manager's job is to teach that employee some things about how to behave in the workplace. And I think agencies and managers do have a duty in that respect, to some extent, to try to do that, to help make that employee the best they can be, whether they're working for me or anybody else. And so we do that, and we do see that. And that's a great point, and I think a huge issue for managers and hiring folks in the workplace.
Thank you for that. We'll go back to the audience. One more question. Diana, you mentioned something about the conversation that we're having about the court of public opinion and whether or not these things are being vetted. Share more on that.
Yes, as the CEO of YWCA Greater Baton Rouge, our mission is to empower women. And as we think about the empowerment of women throughout Baton Rouge and how we can best be of service to make sure our women are prepared to respond if they face any allegations or any issues with sexual harassment, what are some of the things that we can train them to do when it comes to vetting, making sure their case is vetted properly? What are some of the trainings that we can provide to make sure that women feel empowered to respond to these issues once they arise, and so their case isn't a year late and now it can't be addressed because you didn't meet the time parameters? How can we provide more training around that and different topics that you would recommend to ensure that is vetted well?
So I will start with Allison, if you would respond from a legal standpoint in terms of clients that you work with, and then we'll go to Craig.
Well, from a legal standpoint, when somebody comes to me with a sexual harassment claim, I have to talk to them about the cold hard facts. One is that they're going to have to withstand interrogation, and there's going to be some healthy skepticism about the claim. So we have to prove the elements of the cause of sexual harassment. And a lot of times in that conversation, what I tell them is, just by bringing forth the claim, you feel empowered. Not everybody has the strength to do that, though. And so you have to have those conversations from a legal standpoint and feel empowered. And I think your question, as I understand it, not just in the legal setting, but also in the management setting, is how do you give them that type of strength? And I would say that that's really, as Craig said, from your leadership and from a true belief that the policies that are in place and written, that you know, knowledge is power if you know your policies, and a belief that they will be followed and implemented. And that comes from management, and I'll let Craig answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things about the policy is it's not just what you can and cannot do. It's when we get outside of the policy, does that individual know how to comfortably respond? And so it's about making sure that everyone, those employees, feel very comfortable when an action occurs to go to a comfortable channel. What we see now, and I think kind of maybe where you were going with some of the Me Too movements, is they didn't have that avenue.
Right.
And that's when they went to the Me Too movement, and there's nothing wrong with that. They weren't provided that avenue of due process on both sides.
But by them coming forward, it empowers other women who are in the situation who now can timely bring the claims. And so I think that is the beauty of the movement, is that women who have always really known this is going on have now found their voice.
So Allison, would you give us some examples, of course without disclosing any key information?
I've seen it all.
Some of the things we wanted to get an example or two of the kinds of things that come to you so that people can really get a better sense of what might likely happen for them.
I've done this for 33 years, and there is probably nothing that I haven't seen in the workplace. Nothing surprises me anymore. It's as bad as people say, and I know that I only see the tip of the iceberg because not everybody can come to see a lawyer about it. So when I say this is a serious problem, I really believe it's a serious problem. I've seen exposure. I've seen just horrible situations in the workplace. Now that's not to say that they're all that way. Some of them are not. Some of them are claims that can be resolved quickly and are just misunderstandings, and you can get to a mediation and resolve them. But there are egregious acts of sexual harassment occurring, and some of them occurred today. And the question becomes is, if it occurred today, will that person, male or female, because sexual harassment can occur on males if the female is in a position of power, but will that person feel empowered enough to bring the claim, and are there policies in place that will prevent or promptly correct it from happening? And that's where I think we have to have tough conversations, and I think because it does affect women mostly, we have to have the really tough conversation of pay equity. And empowering people all across the board, not really just in the STEM area, but across the board. And I think that would be my comment. But have I seen some egregious acts of sexual harassment? Seen it, litigated it, done it, it's there. Yes.
What about any misunderstandings, things that may have come your way that was actually just a misunderstanding that wasn't a case worthy? I mean, can you give us an example of that?
Sure.
Something that was
a lot
actually
of
not
times
sexual harassment.
you'll have a one-time comment in the workplace, and you'll say, well, does that rise? The law requires that the comment be severe or pervasive. And so the courts will write off some minor conduct and say, oh, those are just mere offensive utterances. And it has to be something that's severe. Well, an act of exposure is severe. Would a reasonable person be offended by that conduct? Yes. Was that person offended by that conduct? Yes. And that's the test that's usually applied. And if it's just a one-time comment or a word comment or something, then it depends on the word. But if it's, say, like sweetheart or honey or something, does it occur on a regular basis? Does it occur after you've indicated it's unwelcomed? And is it pervasive? And I think that those are the standards that the court applies: severe or pervasive and unwelcomed. And one thing that I think Craig hit upon is not all consensual conduct is welcomed conduct. And that's a huge thing for people to understand, because you hear this defense, oh, well, she consented. Well, she may have consented, but she didn't welcome it. And that's a big thing.
It's a big difference.
And sexual harassment is about unwelcomed conduct.
That's a good point to underscore for us. Thank you. Thank you for that. I want to hear now from some of our youngest members, and we'll go with our students from Baton Rouge High. Ravathi, I'll start with you. You had some concerns about sexual harassment outside of the workplace. I know much of our conversation has been on the workplace.
Yeah, right. So I'm Ravathi Menon. I represent Louisiana Youth Advisory Council, and I just had a concern, like, I'm a young person, and I'm in school right now, and sometimes I see around me, like subtle behaviors that could indicate future workplace violations, and I just was wondering what we could do now to address that problem and prevent it from becoming, from escalating and becoming a problem in the future. How do we, like, train or educate people my age, really?
And so are some of these things happening in the school? that you're speaking of, school
Yeah,
or
when it
church?
when it comes to consent, you know how women don't necessarily, girls don't necessarily welcome some actions, or boys too. How do we educate people on the line?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how are we educating people on the line outside of the workplace? What are, and
mean,
basically,
how to deal
and
with
before you
it?
answer that, let's marry that with what we see in the media and the movies in terms of how. And I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but let's go a little deeper if we can.
Well, I mean, again, I think that's the real problem. Is we are dehumanizing women at a very early age. We look at in the media, and we look at what we're seeing, what sells products. We're seeing we're repetitively dehumanizing women and objectifying them. And so where that translates as cultural, and you move on down the line and get older, people don't see a problem with it. And the problem is that we've been conditioned by the objectification of women through certain, marketing and advertising standards, and what we see in the movies and what we see on TV every day. And that's where we have to stop. And that's where we have to train ourselves and train these individuals. We need to stop this behavior, that the comment that sex sells, right? We need to stop because the product that we're getting on the end, we're having a major issue.
So I'm going to tweak the question just a little bit, and I'm looking at you, Janice. I'm going to tweak that question, and from the standpoint of sexual harassment on social media, can it happen? And work that into some of the comments that Craig made as well about the culture and the objectification of women and that type of thing.
Sure, it can. Sexual harassment is physical, it's verbal, it's nonverbal, and it certainly is happening, I think, in social media. Some folks feel very empowered to be behind the screen because it's not a face-to-face. So I do think it's happening there. Regarding what Craig is saying, the culture, it is what it is. I don't know that we get to change that. I think that we have to deal with it. And we deal with it in the workplace through making sure the employees understand, as we said earlier, what the expectations are, that management conveys that to the employee, and that's enforced. And so whatever's happening on the outside, we have to learn how to deal with and manage it inside the workplace with our employees and managers in positions that may have influence over others. And again, I think about folks who are afraid to report. I think the more they're aware and made or given assurance that we want to know, we will treat everyone seriously and with the same due attention, I think you'll start to see that culture change in the workplace, regardless of what's happening in society. I don't agree with what's happening in society. It does impact, but once you get to the workplace, management has a responsibility to try to deal with that.
Okay. Thank you for that, Janice. I really appreciate that. One last question, Sarah.
Oh, my question was answered a long time ago. It was about what was going to come out of the legislature and the task force. Well, let me ask this. For this coming session, what can Louisiana expect to see coming from the Capitol, both from the task force and the legislature, like pre-filed bills or recommendations?
You want to go first?
Sure. Yes, I will have a bill in this next session. And as I mentioned earlier, it will address policy issues as well as training. But part of what we haven't talked about that is also an area of concern is how hiring decisions and appointment decisions get made. That was part of what started this whole thing for me was the gentleman in the governor's office that was a repeat sexual harasser, and he had a repeat history of that. And so I think we have to take that as an opportunity to look at how are those decisions getting made, what are we doing in the way of background checks and other things to make sure that we are making the right decisions and that we're protecting everyone in the workplace to make sure that they have a safe place to work. And so that is going to be part of the legislation also, is looking at that.
That's interesting on the background checks, because I think that, if I'm not mistaken, there's been some reversal of doing background checks. which much to my dismay, I prefer to do the background checks. But to your point, for the task force, our legislation, and it's not our legislation, we have to make recommendations to the governor to then go effect the legislation. It will mandate that state agencies have training, that they have every public servant, not just state employees. The governor can only affect his authority over the departments that are in his executive branch. If there is a law that's passed, it can apply to all public servants, elected officials, boards, commissions, etc. And we think that's the way to go. The other piece of that is the supervisory additional management training, even for your department heads, and then also mandating that every agency have a policy that's consistent with the same provisions that we're recommending. Because we believe, based on our task, we've looked at best practices, we've looked at states' policies, we've looked at others outside of state government and pulled that into what we think makes a really good policy.
So we have run out of time for our question and answers. I want to thank all of our audience for asking your questions. I think we covered most of them in the responses that you heard this evening. We were pretty much on the same page with our concerns in the questions that we had. So I want to thank our panel for being with us. Senator Hewitt, of course, thank you for joining us all the way from Slidell. I know the special session's going on, but you're here. I want to thank you, Janice, for being here as well, Craig, and of course, Attorney Jones for joining us. We're going to come back in just a few moments and have a few more closing comments. And again, thank you for joining us.
Well, Robin, a lively conversation and certainly court of public opinion. I don't know whether it's going to change or whether the pendulum swings the other direction, but it seems like we're going to have a lot more stories coming out.
I suspect you're right. I think that's going to happen quite a bit as we move forward with the Me Too movement and other things just coming out and people feeling more empowered to say things. And I definitely heard that in our audience tonight, even in our panel.
And I'm wondering if it's a generational thing sometime.
Could be. I think younger women, perhaps I'll go out on a limb and say that younger women may feel more comfortable because they're coming up in a generation where things are more vocal, whereas older persons perhaps are a little less vocal because they're feeling as if, that's been the culture and we just, stay quiet. So I think we're going to see a mix of that. Yeah, no question.
Well, I hope we continue the conversation with all of you at home. That's all the time we have for this edition of Louisiana Public Square. We encourage you to visit our website at lpb.org/public square. While you're there, you can take our online survey on sexual harassment and comment on tonight's show. We would love to hear from you.
So join us next month for another episode of Louisiana Public Square. Thanks for watching and have a great night.
Good night.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org.